You probably know the Sunday school version of John the Baptist. You know, you picture that felt board cutout,
Oh,
right?
yeah, the wild guy out in the desert.
Exactly. Wearing camel hair, eating bugs, and baptizing Jesus. It is a very neat, easily categorized image.
Right, but the actual history is so much messier.
It really is. I mean, you probably don't know that his legacy secretly gave us the Do-Re-Mi musical scale,
Right.
or that a piece of his severed finger is currently sitting in a museum in Kansas City, of all places.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is crazy. Or that he is actually revered as the final, ultimate prophet for a religion that still survives to this day in modern Iraq.
Yeah, the jump from a first-century desert ascetic to, the Do-Re-Mi song and this macabre global treasure hunt for body parts it's quite the journey.
It really is.
The part of his story we see in popular culture just barely scratches the surface of the incredibly complex reality beneath it all.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today our mission in this deep dive is to look at a massive stack of sources.
And it is a big stack.
We've got historical records, a Catholic devotional reflection, and these comprehensive encyclopedic articles mapping his place in Islam, Mandaism, and other world religions.
Right, so we are really zooming out here.
Yeah, because to understand the actual man, we first have to separate the gritty historical reality from the immense theological narratives that have just been built up around him over 2 millennia.
And that buildup starts incredibly early.
Right, so let's start with his origins. He is born around 6 BC in a rural town called Ein Karam to Zechariah and Elizabeth.
Yeah, and right from the beginning, before he even takes a breath, the narratives are heavily theological.
How so?
Well, look at the Catholic tradition, for example. The Gospel of Luke details how Mary visits her pregnant relative, Elizabeth.
Right, the Visitation.
Exactly. And the text says the infant John leaped in the womb. But later theologians, like Thomas Aquinas, they didn't just read that as, a baby kicking.
They saw something deeper.
Right. They interpreted this leap as the exact moment John was cleansed of original sin. Like, he was sanctified before he was even born.
Wow, so in that tradition, he is marked as completely exceptional before he even sees daylight.
Precisely.
But then when he finally grows up, he doesn't head for the temples or the centers of power, right?
No, not at all. He goes completely off the grid into the Judean desert.
He adopts this intensely rugged, ascetic lifestyle. He is preaching repentance, baptizing people in the Jordan River, and famously, his diet consists exclusively of locusts and wild honey.
Right. Which brings us to a really fascinating historical twist in our sources.
Oh, I love this part.
It's so good. Let's talk about the early Judeo-Christian Gnostic groups, specifically a sect called the Ebionites.
Okay.
To give a little context, Gnosticism generally viewed the material, physical world as, somewhat corrupt.
So physical things are bad, spiritual things are good.
Exactly. So for the Ebionites, who revered John deeply, eating animals was completely unacceptable.
Oh, wait, so there were vegetarians?
Strict vegetarians. They could not wrap their minds around the idea that their ultimate holy man was out there munching on literal insects.
So what do you do if the historical record completely clashes with your core theology?
Well, you literally alter the text.
Shut up. Really?
They absolutely did. In their version of the Gospel of Matthew, they went into the Greek and changed the word for locusts, which is akris, to a very similar sounding Greek word, ikris.
And what does ikris translate to?
Honey cakes.
Yeah.
Or a type of manna.
He didn't eat bugs, guys. He ate pancakes.
Basically, yeah.
That is wild. I mean, it really shows how early on people were already trying to mold the historical John to fit their own ideological frameworks.
Definitely.
But, you can only mold a living person so much. His uncompromising lifestyle and this massive popularity he builds, it eventually gets him killed.
Right, around 30 A.D.
Yeah, he is executed by the ruler of Galilee, Herod Antipas, at the remote desert fortress of Machaerus. And here's where our sources clash again.
Because we have two vastly different accounts of why he was actually murdered.
We do. So on one hand, you have the gospel version, which is highly personal, super dramatic, and centered on moral condemnation.
Right, the whole marriage scandal.
Exactly. John publicly calls out Herod for unlawfully marrying his brother's ex-wife, Herodias. Herodias is furious.
So she bides her time.
Yeah, until Herod's birthday feast. Her daughter, traditionally named Salome, dances for the guests. Herod is so mesmerized he offers her anything she wants.
And prompted by her mother, She asks for John's head on a platter.
Hold on, though. I mean, think about it. A scandalous dance party and a severed head on a silver platter. It sounds like a soap opera.
It really does.
Especially versus the other account we have, which is from the 1st century Roman Jewish historian Josephus.
Right, and Josephus doesn't mention the dance or the platter at all.
Not a word of it. He writes in Antiquities of the Jews that Herod simply feared John.
Because John had a massive, devoted grassroots following.
Yeah. Herod was terrified this guy was going to spark a political rebellion, so those two motives don't line up at all.
They seem totally contradictory.
Like, he's basically a modern-day whistleblower who gets too popular. As a historian, what do you do with that? Was it a royal soap opera, or was it a preemptive political strike?
It is tempting to pick one, but what's fascinating here is how power actually operates, meaning both can be entirely true at the same time.
Oh, really? How so?
Think about Herod's position. He is essentially a puppet ruler for the Roman Empire.
Right. You have to keep the peace.
Exactly. A genuine political threat. A populist leader gathering thousands of fervent followers out in the desert that is an existential crisis for him.
Sure.
But you don't want to just arbitrarily execute a popular religious leader. That might ignite the exact rebellion you were trying to prevent.
You'd make him a martyr.
Right. You need a good internal excuse. So the personal vendetta, the public insult to the royal marriage, provided Herod with the perfect cover to eliminate a very real external political threat without making it look like he was terrified of John's influence.
Okay, that clarifies things. He is a political powder keg, and the marriage dispute was basically the match that lit it.
Yep.
But John's immense popularity wasn't just a headache for the political establishment. According to the sources, it posed a massive theological challenge for the early followers of Jesus, too.
Oh, absolutely. The biblical scholar John Dominic Crossan frames this beautifully in our sources. He says, quote, John had a monopoly, but Jesus had a franchise.
Okay, unpack the mechanics of that for me. What does a spiritual monopoly look like in the 1st century?
Well, a monopoly means you control the sole point of distribution.
Right.
John's movement was entirely centralized around his physical person and his specific location at the Jordan River.
Because he wasn't traveling around.
No, not at all. If you wanted his baptism of repentance, you couldn't just do it in your local village. You had to endure the trek out into the harsh desert to find John. He was the monopoly.
Wow, okay. And the franchise.
Jesus, however, built a decentralized communal movement. He recruited disciples, taught them, and then sent them out to the surrounding villages to stay with people, eat with them, and spread the message.
Scales.
Exactly. Jesus created a franchise model that could survive, adapt, and multiply far beyond his immediate physical presence.
So you have the monopoly guy and the franchise guy operating around the exact same time. And the Gospels really seem to struggle to align them.
They really do.
Like, if you read the Gospels chronologically based on when scholars believe they were written, the relationship between John and Jesus keeps mutating.
You can actively see the early church wrestling with John's overwhelming legacy. In the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest, John doesn't seem to fully recognize Jesus as the definitive ultimate leader he's been waiting for.
It's a bit ambiguous, right?
Yeah, very much so. But fast forward to the Gospel of Matthew, and John immediately recognizes Jesus' superiority.
Okay.
Move to Luke, and suddenly they're interwoven into the same family tree. They're literal blood cousins.
That's a big jump.
And finally, in the Gospel of John, which is the latest text, John the Baptist explicitly denies that he is the prophesied return of the prophet Elijah. And his entire textual purpose is just to point unequivocally to Jesus.
Our sources actually refer to something called the embarrassment factor, which was coined by scholar Harold W. Attridge.
Yes, that's a crucial concept here.
If I am understanding this right, the early Christian church had a huge PR problem. In the culture of the ancient Near East, the person administering the baptism is the spiritual superior, and the person receiving it is the subordinate.
Correct.
So the undeniable historical fact that Jesus came to John to be baptized was highly embarrassing for early Christians. They had to work overtime to construct a narrative where John is explicitly just the forerunner who steps aside.
Precisely. The historical reality of the baptism implied a hierarchy they just couldn't accept. And it is worth noting that not all religious traditions agree that John actually succeeded in that constructed forerunner role.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the Unification Church offers a completely divergent theology on this. They teach that John the Baptist actually failed his divine mission.
Wait, that completely unravels the Christian narrative.
It totally flips it.
If John is supposed to be the ultimate hype man, the Unification Church is basically saying the hype man refused to get off the stage and ruin the main act. How exactly did he fail?
According to their theology, John's divine mandate was to become Jesus' foremost disciple and seamlessly transition all his massive following over to Jesus.
But he didn't do that.
No, he maintained his own separate ministry until his death. But the critical failure, in their view, happened when the Jewish leaders asked John if he was Elijah.
Right.
Biblical prophecy stated Elijah had to return before the Messiah could arrive. When John explicitly said, "No, I am not," the Unification Church argues he effectively blocked the Jewish people from accepting Jesus.
Oh, wow. Because if Elijah hasn't come, then by definition, Jesus cannot be the Messiah.
Exactly.
That is a staggering theological accusation. But it brings up a question I have been trying to wrap my head around.
What's that?
If John was merely the opening act, the guy whose whole purpose was to fade into the background, why did his own distinct followers continue to exist for centuries after his death?
To understand that, we have to look at the actual mechanics of what they were preaching. Scholar John Dominic Crossan points out that John the Baptist was an apocalyptic eschatologist.
Let's break that down.
Okay, so he genuinely believed that God was about to descend at any moment with imminent fiery judgment to eradicate all evil from the world. The axe was literally at the root of the tree.
So repent right now because the world is essentially ending tomorrow.
Exactly. Just total passive waiting for divine destruction. Jesus, on the other hand, evolved into what scholars call an ethical eschatologist.
Meaning?
Jesus' message shifted away from just waiting for God's fiery judgment and moved toward an active ethic of what God demands human beings to do about evil in the world right now.
Like how to treat the poor, how to love enemies.
Right. Because the core operating mechanisms of their messages were fundamentally different. It was basically inevitable that their followers would eventually splinter and diverge.
And because they diverge, John's legacy didn't just stay safely contained within the boundaries of Christianity.
Oh, not at all.
It exploded outward. This is where the story shifts from a first-century Judean conflict into a global phenomenon. John acts as a theological bridge for billions of people across completely distinct worldviews.
Yeah, let's look at how he is received in Islam. In the Quran, he is known as Yahya ibn Zechariah, and he is highly revered as a prophet.
But it's a different angle, right?
Totally different. The Muslim narrative emphasizes entirely different elements of his character. While Christians focus heavily on his rugged adulthood in the desert, Islam highlights that God granted Yahya profound wisdom while he was still just a child.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is. The Quran elevates his immense compassion, his devotion to his parents, and notably his purity and chastity. The reverence is so deep that in Islamic tradition, during the Prophet Muhammad's miraculous night journey, he actually meets Yahya in the second heaven.
That's amazing. And then you have Mandaism. For anyone unfamiliar, this is a surviving ethno-religious group indigenous to Mesopotamia, with communities today primarily originating from Iraq and Iran.
Right, still around today.
And their take on John is entirely different from both Christianity and Islam. To the Mandaeans, John, whom they call Yohana, is not a forerunner.
Nope.
He is not a subordinate. He is their greatest and final prophet.
Yes, and their historical tradition of his life stands in stark contrast to the solitary ascetic loner we usually picture.
Because they believe he was married, right?
Exactly. Mandaeans believe John was married, that his wife's name was Anhar, and that they had children together.
Wow.
They place immense value on baptism, which they perform repeatedly in flowing water, and they believe they are the direct, unbroken descendants of John's original core disciples.
And he pops up everywhere else, too. In the Druze faith, he is revered as a literal reincarnation of the prophet Elijah.
Which loops right back to the prophecies we mentioned.
Totally. And in the Baha'i faith, they view religious history as a series of divine messengers. They recognize John as a lesser prophet who paved the way for Jesus, whom they consider a manifestation of God.
Right, they actually compare John's specific role to the Bab, who was the herald for their own founder, Baha'u'llah.
It is a perfect parallel in their theology.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. Looking at all these variations, the ascetic, the pure child, the married final prophet, the reincarnation, it feels like we are talking about 5 completely different people.
It does.
Does each religion revere the same historical John, or is it more of a prism effect? Like you have a single beam of light, the historical guy in the desert, and when it hits the prism of world religion, it scatters into 5 totally different colors.
The prism analogy is perfect. Yeah, because the core beam of light remains constant. There was a historical man who was ascetic, who baptized in water, and who possessed an uncompromising, terrifying righteousness.
Right.
But as that light passes through the prism of different cultures, each tradition isolates the specific wavelength they need most.
Oh, I see.
Islam isolates and elevates his chastity and obedience. Mandaism isolates his role as the ultimate bringer of divine light and knowledge. Christianity isolates his sacrificial role as the humble forerunner. He becomes the exact archetype each theology requires him to be.
You might think that this massive splintering of his spiritual legacy is as far as it goes. But it didn't just stop at theology. We have to address the literal, physical splintering of his actual body.
Ah, the reliquary economy.
Yes. The sources note that after his disciples buried his headless body traditionally believed to be in the city of Sebast, a frantic, centuries-long historical scramble began to claim pieces of him.
It got intense.
And the biological math is absurd. There are currently at least 4 different prominent locations claiming to possess the skull of John the Baptist.
4 skulls?
There's the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, the Church of San Silvestro in Capite in Rome, a stunning cathedral in Amiens, France, and the Munich Residence Museum. 4 skulls for 1 neck.
And the limbs are just as fractured.
Right. His right arm, the specific arm that supposedly baptized Jesus, is claimed by a cathedral in Siena, Italy, a monastery in Montenegro, and an Armenian church in Chinsura, India, where the arm supposedly miraculously blesses worshippers every single year.
Which is an incredible geographical spread.
And let's not forget the left finger bone, which currently sits inside a Gothic gold monstrance at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City, Missouri.
Of course.
So what does this all mean for the listener? Why should you care that there are 4 severed heads and scattered fingers sitting in glass boxes around the world? Beyond the dark humor of it, what was the actual mechanism behind this obsession?
This raises an important question, actually.
Yeah.
Because we look at 4 skulls today, we apply modern biological logic and we laugh.
Sure.
But to understand this, you have to get inside the medieval psychology of the relic.
Yeah.
For people of that era, it was not about DNA testing or forensic accuracy.
No.
The world was terrifying and unpredictable. Relics were basically spiritual batteries.
Oh, I like that term.
Yeah, John the Baptist represented immense localized divine power. To acquire a piece of his body, even a highly dubious piece, was to anchor that divine power directly into your city's cathedral.
So it makes it tangible.
Exactly.
Okay.
It meant God's grace wasn't just an abstract concept in the sky, it was physically present in the bone on your altar. It protected your crops, healed your sick, and proved that the sacred had physically touched your specific patch of earth.
It is a deeply physical approach to faith. You want to actually touch the divine, but you might assume this obsession with John's presence died out in the Middle Ages.
It didn't.
It just mutated, it seeped out of the church reliquary and right into your secular everyday life, starting with the very music you listen to.
This is one of the most surprising artifacts of his legacy.
In the 11th century, an Italian monk named Guido d'Arezzo was trying to solve a practical problem. He needed a mechanism to teach his choir monks how to sight-read music pitches accurately.
Right.
So he invented the standard musical stave. To do this, he used a well-known Latin hymn dedicated to John the Baptist called Ut Quinta Laxus.
And the way this hymn was structured is the key. Each sequential line of the chant started exactly 1 note higher on the scale than the previous line.
Okay.
So Guido took the first syllable of each line to represent that specific pitch. Those syllables were ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la.
He extracted the pitches. He literally created the solmization scale.
He did.
It was later swapped out for do to make it easier to sing, but the do-re-mi scale that you learn in elementary school that forms the basis of Western music is mechanically derived from a prayer asking John the Baptist to clear their vocal cords.
It's amazing. And his structural impact on visual art is just as foundational.
Oh, yeah.
If you walk into any Eastern Orthodox church, you will encounter the desis icons.
What are those?
This is a highly stylized traditional image where Jesus is seated in the center as the judge, and Mary and John the Baptist are flanking him on either side, their hands raised, pleading for mercy on behalf of humanity. He is quite literally a pillar of their visual theology.
And in Western art, the horrific story of his execution sparked an entire cultural obsession.
The power of women motif.
Yes.
During the Renaissance, society became captivated by this specific trope. The glamorous, irresistible, but ultimately fatal woman who brings down a powerful man.
And Salome was the perfect fit for that.
Right. Salome, holding John's severed head on a platter, became the absolute pinnacle of this genre. It wasn't just a biblical scene. It was an exploration of fatal attraction, psychological manipulation, and the rot of courtly corruption.
And it jumps from high art to street parties, too.
It does.
His feast day is June 24th. Early Christians intentionally merged his celebration with the pagan summer solstice, because John famously said regarding Jesus, he must increase, but I must decrease. It was a brilliant poetic maneuver to celebrate John's birth on the exact day the sun begins to decrease in the sky.
That's so clever.
Right. And today, that translates into massive secular blowouts. In Brazil, you have the Festa Juninas, where millions of people celebrate with square dancing, massive bonfires, and traditional corn and peanut dishes. In Portugal, the city of Porto essentially shuts down for one of Europe's liveliest street festivals in his honor, and the entire capital of Puerto Rico, San Juan, carries his name.
His footprint is just inescapable.
But let's dig into why for a second. If you have ever sung Do Re Mi, or stood around a midsummer bonfire, or danced at a June festival, you are participating in the legacy of a guy who lived in a cave and wore camel hair.
Right.
Why does an uncompromising, brutal ascetic appeal so deeply to modern, highly compromised societies?
I think we are fascinated by John precisely because he represents a level of brutal, unbending integrity that most of us are completely incapable of maintaining. We live in a world of constant compromise, of gray areas, of managing optics. John didn't manage his optics.
He definitely didn't.
He didn't care about the political fallout of calling out the king's marriage. He didn't soften his message to get more followers. He spoke absolute truth to power and paid the ultimate price for it. In a deeply compromised world, a figure of ultimate ascetic rebellion is incredibly alluring.
So we have traced a staggering trajectory today. We started with a rural preacher in the Judean desert who dunked people in a river and demanded they radically change their lives.
Yeah.
He becomes a massive political threat to a Roman puppet king. He inadvertently causes a theological crisis for the early Christians trying to explain the mechanics of Jesus' baptism.
And from that singular historical point, his legacy shatters in a million directions.
It really does.
He becomes the pure, miraculously wise child prophet of Islam. He becomes the married final bringer of light for the Mandeans. His physical bones become spiritual batteries scattered from Damascus to Kansas City.
And his name is stamped on the fundamental architecture of our music, our art, and our cities.
We started by looking at John Dominic Crossan's idea that John had a monopoly in the desert while Jesus built a franchise.
Right.
But when you step back and look at this vast, fragmented landscape, the four skulls, the five world religions, the Renaissance paintings, the musical scales, you realize something profound about how history uses people.
Which is
Perhaps John the Baptist didn't just prepare the way for one single religious movement. Perhaps his ultimate historical function is that he became a mirror.
the prism analogy again.
Exactly. Whether you are a Christian seeking a humble forerunner to validate your Savior, a Muslim seeking a flawless model of purity, a Mandean seeking the ultimate truth of ancient gnosis, or a secular artist looking for the ultimate symbol of tragic defiance against corrupt power. Wait, let me rephrase that. Whether you seek truth, purity, or defiance, you find the exact John you are looking for.
He reflects back whatever ideological or spiritual necessity you bring to him. Once you see the incredibly complex, multifaceted reality behind that simple Sunday school felt board cutout, you really can't unsee it.
You really can't. And it leaves us with a provocative question that extends far beyond first-century history.
If John the Baptist is a historical mirror, which piece of his fractured legacy do you carry with you? What exactly are you looking for when you look into it? We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the simple narratives, keep demanding to know how things actually work beneath the surface, and we'll catch you next time.